Wonderful. Okay, so thanks for joining once again. Of course, I'm Dwight Taylor, the guy you can blame for all of your Tableau woes. Uh, Feel free to do that. Today's Lunch and Learn is going to be about building maps in Tableau. Now, some of you probably, well, let me see. I'm trying to think of whether I've seen any maps. I think
Boy,
I've
look
seen.
at this. This was last year.
Don't know who that is talking, but we can hear you.
Dwight, just mute the person.
Yeah, let me get out of presentation mode and see if we can do that.
HSA?
Who was that
No,
talking?
my
Was that?
HSA is right here, 342. Whatever, my rollover IRA, that'll be this.
Yeah, there we go. All righty, wonderful. So today's session, once again, is about building maps in Tableau. I think I've seen a couple of workbooks with maps in them. I'm gonna say
Lifeline was one. Yeah,
That's
Lifeline. Yeah.
that's just what I was about to say. Lifeline is probably the only one that I saw that I think has maps in it. Anyway, we're gonna dig into maps. Now, I will say at the onset that this is going to be a multi-part lunch and learn, uh, just because of the fact that maps are a very huge concept inside of Tableau Desktop and Tableau in general, and how you work with them. Now, I did want to ask a quick question, and Anthony, thanks for joining. Is there a group inside of Metro Health that does sort of geospatial analysis, that sort of thing? Or are there people who sort of specialize in that area using Esri or any type of mapping servers or anything like that?
Not that I know of, but I know that Wendy Thomas in Marketing Intelligence does a lot with geospatial, and I believe some of the people in Ryan Johnson's group in population health.
Okay. All right, wonderful. It's not critical to us moving forward. I was just wondering, I'm curious whether we have teams who kind of focus in that area, or their data analysis is really around geospatial analysis. Okay, well, nevertheless, let's jump in. I think what I was saying before is that it's going to be the mapping topic is going to cover multiple lunch and learns. I think maybe 3, but possibly 4, depending on your questions. All right, so friendly reminder, as I'm talking and going through stuff, feel free to stop me at any point and jump in with your question, unmute yourself. Also, friendly note, I have a voice activated speaker system, which means, I can go on and on talking, but if there's no sound coming from the other end, my speaker, in order to save energy and all that kind of stuff, goes off. And then when it recognizes a voice coming in, it comes back on. But in the interim of it coming back on, I may miss your first comment. So if you hear me saying, did I miss something? That's why. Okay. All right. Let's jump in. Maps are relatively straightforward in Tableau, but they may not be, it may not be straightforward in terms of the data that you have, right? So let's talk about what it takes to build a map in Tableau. What's necessary? What do you need to have in your data? Do you need to have anything in your data to build a map? The answer to that question is simply yes. And there are 3 types of data content that will allow you to automatically leverage Tableau's mapping capability. Okay. The first are, which is the most common, are fields that have been given a geocoding role. When I say geocoding role, what I mean is city, state, zip, country, county, um, sales region, right? Those things can be given a geocoding role. Now, if you have something that's custom like sales region, which is entirely different for every company, you'd have to have something in your data that represents the location of the sales region or the area of the sales region. And we'll talk about that in later sessions. Okay, we won't talk about that specifically today. Custom polygons or custom regions with mapping in Tableau. But so you need some fields that have fields that where you, the Tableau designer, has indicated that specific one or more fields is playing a geocoding role. Once you have that type of field, it's really easy to build a map. That's the first way. The second way to build maps in Tableau are to have fields that represent the latitude and longitude coordinates for a region. And they don't necessarily have to be actual lat and long specifiers or indicators or numbers or representations. They could actually be any field that you want to specify as an XY axis. Again, that particular aspect, taking fields and mapping them according to some map that you want to use in a map or in a mapping visualization, we'll cover that in a later session. We're not going to cover that today. I'm just going to cover the basics today. That's why under the agenda it says the basics. But you need, you need, there are three type of fields that have to be present in your data set in order to create a map. Geocoded field, Latin long field, or fields that have been mapped to X and Y coordinates for some type of custom map that you want to use. A really good, a good example of a custom map would be a floor plan, right? Metro Health has hospitals, right? So let's say you have the floor plan of the hospital, and what you really want to visualize is where everybody sits. You're doing capacity planning, or you're doing facilities planning, whatever, right? You need to build a visualization for that. These are frequent types of visualizations that people build in Tableau: floor plans and where people sit, seating charts. In order to do that, number one, we're not going to do that today, but we are going to do that in one of the following sessions. But in order to do that, you need a custom map. You need the floor plan, of course. So instead of showing a map of the globe or a map of the United States, you'd have the floor plan as your map. But in order to place desks or people, whatever your data set represents, on the map, you then have to map some element in your data to the map, right? So that's what the third bullet here means when it says fields mapped to XY coordinates of a custom background. Custom background, custom map. They're interchangeable, okay? All right, now I'll move on to what are the general types of mapping visualizations that are created in Tableau, right? First, you have proportional symbol maps, and we're going to build some of these today and look at some others, okay? Proportional symbol maps, and this essentially, you can, in your mind, picture the United States, and on top of the United States, there's some type of shape. Could be an umbrella, could be an anvil, could be a car, right? Car sales across the US. And the size of the car represents the aggregation of the metric, whatever that metric is, whether it's profit, sales, loss, whatever it is, right? Okay, so that's proportional or symbol maps, shape maps, they're also called. Then you have choropleth maps, which essentially are field maps, right? So you take a geographical region or a geographical area specified by your data, and you fill it with some metric, right? And usually, traditionally, doesn't have to be this way, but traditionally, there's a color continuum or a color spectrum that sort of represents the aggregation and the comparison of one region to the other region, right? It's the depth of the color or the range of the color, Okay, so that's a choropleth map or a field map. Then you have point distribution maps. Now, point distribution maps are, okay, let's take a map that shows where each order occurs across the US. Okay, where each order occurs. And because you have 5 million orders, your map is going to have 5 million data points at some place in the United States, if that's the region that you're mapping, right? So these maps usually are high in data marks, but the data itself is shaped in such a way that it doesn't cause a problem. You know, in some of my previous sessions, I said the less data, the better the performance. But for maps, when you have a point distribution map, as long as your data doesn't do a bunch of calculations for each data point, you know, the performance is really good when it comes to a map, just putting points on a map, right? Then you have heat maps, which essentially are density maps. And we'll take a look at an example of a density map. You have flow maps, which are path maps, or which also are called path maps. And they are maps that say you have flight data or movements of a tornado, right? You want to map the path a tornado takes across some area, some geographical area, right? Those are flow maps. And then you have spider maps. Spider maps, I guess a good example of a spider map would be a map of taxi cab routes across the city, right? Taxi cabs go back and forth across a geographical area. And the back and forth from point A to point B, and then point B to point C, and then point C to point D, those create spider webs, right? So what a spider map is, or origin destination map is another name for those. And then you have custom polygon maps. Now, I talked about that earlier. We're not going to cover that today. But you can create your own custom polygons from data. And when we say custom polygons, I'm talking about polygons that are, or shapes that are created from the actual data, right? We're not talking about, you can put custom in. We put the Metro Health logo inside of a Tableau dashboard. I'm not talking about that type of shape. We're talking about shapes that are actually drawn by Tableau according to your data. That's what a custom polygon is, okay? So Tableau does the shape drawing. It's not like an image that you import into Tableau. All right. So we'll look at some map types. I'll give you a very helpful resource to get, that you can use as a springboard if you want to become familiar with building maps. And then I'm going to spend the bulk of the hour talking about showing you in Tableau some of the things you can do with maps and the features, where they live. I'm not going to use, I'll use some of them, but I'm not going to use all of them because we just won't have enough time. And I want to touch on each subject with enough information so that this initial video will give you a very healthy introduction to maps and what you can do right out of the box with Tableau. Customization, we'll talk about at a later time, okay, or in another lunch and learn. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and I'll show you this site. Now, as you all know, once I am done with this lunch and learn, I'll publish this workbook to the Tableau Lunch and Learns project on the Tableau production server. And so you'll have this slide including this URL right here, okay? This URL is a website where Tableau, the company itself, posts a lot of workbooks that align to its online self-taught training modules, okay? This is where you can find the actual workbooks themselves and download them, okay? And in this section, there's more than just map topics here, but in this section are a lot of the map topics that we just discussed, or map types, right? So proportional symbol maps or shape maps, This URL will give you a great deal of samples, and it's going to be it's the samples that I'm going to use when we discuss maps. Just because it's there, you can download it. It's already built. You know, I don't have to build a ton of custom stuff. And you know, you're free to go download it and sort of reverse engineer what they're doing inside of there. Okay. So let's start. I think I'll start with, let's see if I can find a proportional map. Yeah, here's one right here. Okay. So here's a proportional symbol map. Now, I actually have this downloaded on my computer, so I'm going to open it up. I'll load it in the web browser inside of the workbook, but I'm actually going to open up the actual workbook. But you can see here what this map is about, right? This map is, the symbol that the map uses is circles, right? And circles appear on the map according to their geographical location per the data, okay? So here's the US right here, right? And so this is actually tornado data, right? This is the path of tornadoes, okay? And where they, I think it's tornadoes. I'm pretty sure it's tornado. I think this is tornado data. Yeah. Anyway, so this is a symbol map. And so each one of these points represent, or these are earthquakes, sorry. So each one of the points represents an earthquake that has occurred somewhere on the globe. And of course, this map is pretty much the entire globe, right? So the earthquake, each point represents an earthquake and its magnitude and the date that it occurred, right? And then the region that it occurred in, right? So here's a magnitude that happened in Idaho in 1983, so on. All right, so let's open up that actual map and we'll take a look at how they built it. And then I'm going to go in Tableau and we're going to just do some fun map stuff. We're going to start with a basic map, and I'll talk to you about things you can do inside of Tableau. Proportional symbol map, there we go. And this is going to be the same map. And by the way, when I publish this workbook, as I stated, this URL will be there for you to use at your desire, right? You can use it as frequently as you like. Okay, so here's the map. And I want to point out a couple of things regarding this map. The first thing I want to point out is latitude and longitude. There are two green pills here, okay? Now, because this data, let me get out of this view, because this data actually has lat and long information in it, it has geographical information in it, the lat and long actually come from, they're automatically generated inside of Tableau. When Tableau recognizes you have some data that can be mapped, right? Now that can be done by default, or it can be done by you, the Tableau designer. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a second, okay? So lat and long is the latitude and longitude coordinate for each one of the events in the data, okay? All right, and then there are other elements which I won't talk about the rest of these. But what makes it a shape map is that you have lat and long on columns and rows. And then the type of map is automatic with size being a multitude. So by default, when you create a map, it'll create a proportional map. That's the default map type in Tableau, which I'm going to show you in a second. So the default map type is a proportional map or a shape map. And you can do that just by double clicking on any geocoded field in Tableau, which I'm going to demonstrate shortly. And because that is the default map type, anytime you create a map, that's the type of map it's going to create. You can change that, of course, which we'll do. But that's just to let you know that proportional maps are the default map type. All right, so that's what a proportional map looks like. If you have, and this is some really rich data, right? So it's earthquake data from a very long period of time, right? And so this is a nice data set. You can see where earthquakes predominantly happen. And quite a few of them happen over bodies of water, which makes sense, right? And coastlines. All right. So let's get back into our little sample workbook here and let's start playing. Now, what I just said is that when you build a map by default, and by the way, let me stop right here and answer any questions. We haven't gone over much, so I don't suspect there are any questions, but there may be. Anyone have any questions at this point? Okay. Now, remember, I got a voice activated speaker system. So if I don't hear click, that means nobody said anything. All right. So let's talk about creating a map. All right. So right now in my data source, first thing to note is that geocoded fields inside of your data source will always have a globe icon next to them. They'll have a globe icon next to them. They can be a field that comes directly from your data source, or it can be a calculated field. Either one. Nevertheless, if they're playing a geocoding role in your data source, if the field has a geocoded role, it will have a globe. If it is not playing a geocoded role, it will not have a globe. And as you'll notice here, I don't have one field with a globe next to it. I have ABC, I've got a couple of calendars, I've got some hash symbols, which are numbers, but no globes. Turning a field into a geocoded role is very simple, right? You right-click the field that has a geocoding type: state, city, zip, region, lat long, something like that, okay? And you'll notice down here, I do not have a latitude and longitude field. Now, what I said earlier is that Tableau automatically creates these fields for you, but it only creates them if Tableau thinks you have a geocoded field in your data set. Now, there are some assumptions that Tableau makes in order to determine whether you have a geocoded field. And one of those assumptions is if you have a field called state. And then in that field, there are things that Tableau recognizes as actual states of some country, not just the US, any country, right? Or you have zip codes, or you have counties, or you have providences, right? I think in the Middle East, providences are really popular over like what we would be familiar with, which are zip codes or cities and states, right? So if Tableau recognizes you have a geocoded field, it'll try to give them a geocoded role. The reason it does that is so that it can automatically create Latin long companions that go along with the geocoded field. But if you don't have any geocoded fields, if you don't have any fields that play a geocoding role in your data source, you won't get the Latin long by default. Tableau won't create them. Doesn't make sense to create them, right? All right, so let's take state. Let's give it a geocoded role, and the way you do this is by clicking a field. In the middle of the right-click menu or the context menu, there's something known as geographic role. And you can choose which role you want it to play. Now, this is state, so I'm going to choose state/province for the geographic role for this field in my data source. And I don't know whether you all noticed or not, but the moment I specified state as a geographic field or the moment I gave the state field a geographic role, Tableau automatically added these two. Okay. Now, please notice there is an identifier next to latitude and longitude, and that identifier says generated, right? Okay, says generated. I don't know if you all noticed or not, but in our earthquake data, the latitude and longitude does not say generated. Haha. So in this data set, lat and long are actually fields in the data. Makes sense, right? Where did the earthquake happen? We need to know where it happened. Where was the epicenter of the earthquake? Okay. What you have here is lat and long in the actual data. That is the epicenter lat and long coordinate of the earthquake. But in a data set where you don't have lat and long coming in your data, but you do have fields that play geographic roles, Tableau will automatically generate the Latin long center point for that specific geographic role being played by that field. And you say, well, Dwight, the state is a pretty big geographic area. How can Tableau pick one Latin long coordinate? Because a state has many Latin long coordinates within it because it covers a wide area. Great question. And so Tableau chooses a logical option, which is the center point, which is also the default for geospatial analysis, right? If you're going to pick an area, if you need to map an area and you want its lat long position, unless you're going to create the area with all of its Latin long positions, right? You're going to draw the boundary of the area, just pick the center point, somewhere near the center point, right? We're not going to get into exact science, I don't think. All right, so state is playing a role. I'm also going to choose postal code and give it a geographical role of zip code, postcode. We'll choose country and give it a geographical role of country, region, and then we'll give city a geographic role. Now, question, Dwight, since you are not asking questions. What if I bring in some data in Tableau? I know I have geographic data, but Tableau doesn't recognize it as geographic data. It won't automatically give it a globe. Why is that? Well, there could be a number of reasons for it. The number one reason is Tableau recognizes information in your data set that it cannot place into a geographic role. If it recognizes elements of your data set that are like that, and it's not just nulls, right? I'll give a perfect example. Let's say you have IL for Illinois, you have the full word Illinois, and then you have ILL for Illinois. Now, all of those three, Tableau would categorize as a geographic value, and it would give your field a geographic role. But if you have all three of those values, and then in one row of your data, you have 0, 2. So you got IL, ILL, and Illinois. I didn't go with OH or Ohio because I don't live in Ohio. I live in Illinois. Anyway, so if you have those three values, but you have a number or some other value that is not recognized as a state, Tableau will not give it a geographic role. That's just one scenario. There are other scenarios, okay? All right, so hopefully that answers your question on if you have, you have data that should be playing a geographic role, but Tableau didn't recognize it as such, you might want to do some data analysis. And I'll give you a quick tip on how to do that. If you want to know the distinct set of members that are a part of any dimension in your data set, all you have to do is right-click that field, go down to describe, and normally, because this is an extract, Tableau has already done this. But when you click describe, it gives you some high-level information on the field, where it came from, column width, and all that kind of good stuff. And then it'll have domain members. Or it will have domain members, but it will have nothing listed down here. If there's nothing listed down here, this button will be enabled, the load button. If you click the load button, that will give you a unique list of every value in that field. Pretty much. Now, you see it is listing out 20 of 531, right? So, if you have a long list like I've got here, then you can't see the whole list. But the first way is to look this way if you have a small dimension. And then if you have a large dimension, the best way to do it is just take the field, drag it, and drop it on rows. And you can scroll up and down and look at all the values, okay? And once again, this is a scenario where if you have a data set, you have a field that should be playing a geographic role so you can build maps, but Tableau's not recognizing it as that. You might want to do a little bit of data analysis, right? Because there's a reason Tableau didn't recognize it as a geocoding possibility, okay? All right. Now that we have our geocoded fields, let's build our proportional/shape map. How do we do that? Really simple. Simply double click on a geocoded field. That's it. That's how you build a map in Tableau. Just double click on a field that is playing a geocoded role. And as I mentioned, remember what I said, the first thing I said is proportional maps or shape maps are the default map type in Tableau. So by default, if you don't tell Tableau what type of map you want to build, that's what it's going to build. There are some other defaults, which I'm going to talk about now and show you about now. And then the other thing that I stated was, because you have a geocoded field, which in this instance is state, I'm going to undo this and show you what city and postal code looks like in a second. Because it's state, Tableau automatically built some lat and long fields for us, and they have the keyword generated by them. That's how you know Tableau created them for you. When I double click state, what Tableau did was put state on detail and put the longitude on columns and the latitude on rows. Okay. All right. Pretty simple, straightforward, right? Okay. Let's blank that out and let's double click on city and see what that gives us. Same type of map, shape map, but this time it covers the cities that we have in our data set. Please note, there's some that don't have any cities. And then there's some that have multiple cities within a state, right? Which is what you would expect, right? Because this is sales data. So there's some regions we don't have any business, we're not doing any business in, right? North Dakota, Wyoming, and some other places. I think Alabama is one of them. We're right on the border of Alabama, but I don't think we have any sales in Alabama, right? And so that's what you would expect. Let's undo that and double click on postal code. Let's see what postal code gives us. Same type of map, default type of map in Tableau, okay? All right. Now that we know how to create maps, and by the way, Tableau partners with a company called OpenStreetMap to provide the backgrounds for your map. And since we did a performance recording session in our last Lunch and Learn, I want to mention something here. Anytime you have maps inside of your Tableau workbook and you do a performance recording, there's going to be, you'll remember what one of the things I mentioned was that, if you see a performance bar that's more than a second long, it's reason for pause. There's one exception to that rule, and that exception is if you have maps inside of your workbook. And the reason for that is that although Tableau has downloaded, it has some static content located on your computer to render maps, it always queries OpenStreetMap, the website, when you use a map. And if it can't query OpenStreetMap, your map begins to look sort of strange inside of Tableau Desktop, okay? And I'll talk about that in a second. But the reason I brought that up is because in your performance review, you're going to see a bar that may be between 3 and 6 or 7 seconds. And that 3 to 7 second bar is usually the time it takes for your computer to query an external website that Tableau Desktop is using to build the map. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's helpful to someone, especially if you're doing a performance review with a dashboard that has a map on it. Okay. All right. So here's our regular map, right? Let's blank that one out and let's start a different map. I'm going to go with state, but I don't want a shape map. This time, I actually want a choropleth or a field map. Now, in order to change this from a shape map, and for those of you who doesn't believe this is a shape map, watch this. I'll change it to shape, and I'm going to change my shape to, let's change it to an umbrella. I like umbrellas. Yeah, let's change it to an umbrella. And just in case you don't believe it's an umbrella, those are umbrellas, okay? So I got an umbrella for every state in which I have data. All right. And I want you to notice something. Did anybody notice that for North Dakota, when we were looking at city, we didn't have any data. But when we look at state, we have a dot for North Dakota. Okay. I think this probably is obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, especially when you start dealing with maps, especially when you start dealing with cities in the United States. Okay. Cities alone will give you a bad representation of your data. Cities alone will give you a bad representation of your data. The reason why is because there are cities that have names in multiple states, right? That's why, okay? So if you're dealing with hierarchical geographic data and you're dealing with city and state, specifically for the US, what I highly recommend is that you use state with city according to your data. And then if a city is in the wrong state, it's a problem with the data and not a problem with the map. But if you leave it to Tableau to map a city alone, it'll map cities incorrectly. Okay. That's a note for you. Okay. So that's why there was nothing here when we were just in city. But if I put city on the map now on detail, you can see we definitely have an umbrella in North Dakota. And it's on the border of North Dakota and Minnesota. Okay. All right. So let's undo that. All right. So there's a shape map and we've got our umbrellas. Now they're all the same size right now. Okay. All the same size. There's no difference in size. But if we take profit and drop it on size, then the umbrellas change their size. Right. So our highest profit states are New York and California. Next to that is Washington. And then following that, a close follow would be New York or New Jersey, Delaware, and so on and so on and so on, right? So we can drop something on shape. That's how you get a proportional shape map. And the shapes that you include on your map can be sized according to whatever you specify. We can change this to sales. That looks a lot different than profit, right? So we can tell where our highest sales are. Same thing, right? New York and California, and then Texas, and then Washington. Okay. All right. Let's go back, change that from a shape map back to our regular shape map. And how do we change this to a field map, a choropleth? Well, you simply click on the marks card. This is what's known as the marks card. From automatic on a map to there's an item called map here. You just choose map. Voila. Now you have a field map. Now it's not too informative because all the states are the same color. But what I want you to notice is that number one, all of the states are filled according to their boundaries, their geographical boundaries. And the state names are there, but they're very difficult to see. Okay, very difficult to see, and that's intentional, right? And we're going to get into that in a second, but they're very difficult to see. However, you can change the opacity of color and make them easier to see. They're a little bit easier to see now, right? When I change the opacity of the color. Now in field maps, automatically Tableau gives you a color. Okay, and the default color for Tableau is blue, right? And then if we wanted to actually color states by some metric, some measurement, we would just drop that measurement onto color. Voila. Right? You have sales by state. Okay, and it's colored, right? So our highest sales are California and New York, and then close to that is Washington, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. And you can actually change this, of course. So we can change this color scheme to some other color scheme. I like orange and blue diverging. Yeah. And if we drop profit on there, we can see how the colors will change, right? So our least profitable state is Texas, and so on and so on. So that's a choropleth, right? Choropleth map or a field map. Now, I'm going to stop right there with map types because those are the basic map types in Tableau. And now we're going to dig into some customization stuff. And in order to do that, I'm going to go back to our original map because I want you to be able to see most of the map. And I want you to notice a few things which probably are not apparent because of the screen sharing. But this map has a couple of things on it. The first thing it has on it is waterways, right? So here's Lake Michigan. Yeah, I'm horrible with geography. I don't know what these bodies of water are. This is some ocean. That's another pond or lake, or I don't know what the heck it is. Anyway, so you can see the bodies of water are represented in white, and the land masses are represented in gray. But what's also not apparent is you have the mountain ranges in the west region of the United States that are also showing up. But because they're sort of faded out, you can't really see them that well, okay? What's also present on the map is country, United States. I don't know if anybody saw that, right? So this is the name of the country that you're looking at. And then you have the states that you're looking at. And then you have the boundaries, right? And then we have other countries. So, you know, if you zoom out, you can see other countries, right? And sections of those countries. All right, so let's get back to where we were. All right, so we have a map here. Now, in Tableau, there's a map menu. This is where you're going to spend your time if you want to customize a map visualization in Tableau. And this is where we're going to spend the bulk of the rest of our few minutes that we have together. So we have a shape map here, but what I'm interested in is I want to change the background of this map. That's what I want to do first. Okay, here's how you do that. You go to map, map backgrounds, and you can change it right from here. There are some templated values right here, right? So this is light. Let's go to normal and see how that changes. Not too much of a change. The land masses are still gray, but the waterways are now aquamarine or whatever color that is. Basically, for me, it's green. All right. Let's go to another option. Let's choose dark. Okay, that's the way you get the land masses are a very dark shade of gray, and it's a little bit easier to see, you know, the mountain ranges here. Just a tad bit, not much, but it's a little bit easier with the dark gray. You can see the flat plains, right? Okay, and the waterways are a mid shade of gray. Let's see, then we'll take a look at streets. Much easier to see the mountain ranges here, right? Much easier on the streets view. And then the waters are sky blue, okay? So these are different styles that you can use for your maps. And outdoors is pretty much the same thing as street map. And then there's satellite. Wow, look at that. Right? Now, Dwight, what if, I know we have our shapes here. Let's make sure we understand we have shapes here. We still have our shapes. There they are, right? And we're looking at a satellite view of the United States. Now, what's missing from this are state boundaries, right? We can't see the state boundaries. We can definitely see the mountainous region of the U.S. versus the, you know, the plain, the flat plain area of the U.S. or the hilly area of the U.S., but we don't see the state boundaries, which can be a problem for, you know, the visualization we're trying to create. But it's engaging nonetheless. And then there are two last options, which I really want to discuss here. So one of the things I stated earlier was, if you come into Tableau and let's say you don't have internet access, your map is going to look kind of funny from when you did have internet access. Let's go back to the light view, the default view, so we can talk about these last two options before we conclude for today. This default view is, and I mentioned in the performance recording, there's a query that you're going to see to an external source, and it takes about from 3 to 7 seconds, depending on how fast your internet is and how fast your computer running and all of that. It actually queries a fresh map from OpenStreetMap. Okay, Tableau, one of Tableau's partners. That's the partner it uses for its mapping application inside of Tableau Desktop. But that requires an internet connection. So what if you don't have an internet connection? Well, if you come into your map inside of Tableau, this is what your map is going to look like. There you go. Now, for those of you with pretty good recollection, which is probably all of us, you can see the outline of the United States, right? Right? You can pretty much see it. Right? But there's no map, which is kind of troubling, especially if you're in a presentation to show people your nice, shiny new map. If you experience that, one of two reasons. Number one, you don't have access to the internet, or you are on offline, the offline option, which stops Tableau from querying OpenStreetMap. Okay. You can also specify none, no map. Now, please notice what just happened here. Earlier on, I mentioned if you have a custom background like a floor plan and you wanted to do a seating chart in Tableau, it's done quite a bit and it's easy to do. This would be how you would do a seating chart. You can see here, I have a Y and an X axis, and then I have dots plotted on that axis, right? So if you imagine, if this is a floor plan, putting people in sections on the floor plan is pretty simple. What I need to do is get the right coordinate, right, for the floor plan. Now, of course, this is the United States, and what we've done essentially by choosing the none option is created a grid of the United States. And then if we wanted to change this into a shape chart, right, and go back to our friendly umbrella, it's a way of, I'll choose a rain cloud. Let's choose some sunshine this time. It's a way of showing shapes in the shape of a geographical region, but not actually showing the map of the region. You could want to do that, right? Creativity. All right. Let's get back out of there. We're running out of time. It's 11:48. I want to talk about a few other options, a few other things you can do. All right. There's something in Tableau. And by the way, these bottom options are how you add. You can use maps from Mapbox. You can use maps from a custom mapping service or server. Mapbox is a mapping service. A WMS map is, which is at the start of the session, I asked whether there was a geospatial group within Metro Health. In larger companies, they have groups that sort of focus on geospatial analysis. And so they have mapping servers. They create their own, for example, sales region maps or Salesforce maps or distribution maps or supply chain maps or whatever type of map is relative to the business that they do. And you could use those maps inside of Tableau. You can even specify if Metro Health had a mapping server on premise, you could specify that mapping server. You can also add maps to Tableau. You can import a map, okay, into Tableau. And these are the options for doing that. You can manage maps. You can add a map. Remember, I stated that one of the ways to create maps in Tableau is to map a X or map fields to X and Y coordinates for a custom map. Okay, so if you had a custom map, like a floor plan, which I do, I actually have a floor plan here, you could add that custom WS mapping. Okay, And they pretty much have an extension called WMS if you're interested in that. Now, I heard a click. Did someone have a question? No? Okay, I'm going to keep going because I'm almost out of time. We've got 10 minutes left. I'm not going to talk about images today. I'm not going to talk about this imported custom geocoding today. And I'm not going to talk about locations today. I'm going to skip all three of those. What I am going to, the last thing I'm going to close with is map layers. Now, a map is the constitution of a number of different things, right? And so I want to show you an example of that before we close. Remember, I started talking about the background. It's light gray. You can't really tell what's going on there. And I showed you how to sort of change that. But what's really not apparent is what that background is comprised of. And it is components, or in Tableau, layers. And here are some of the layers that you're seeing on this screen. Remember, I mentioned the United States. I said the state name was here. I said the state boundaries are here. I said you could see the waterways. They're white. You don't know what they are, but you can see them nonetheless. And then there's some light gray, and then there's some mountainous regions, which is kind of hard to make out. I said all of that. Well, here's where that information is included, and it's included by default in Tableau, okay? So the base map, let's turn off base, and then you'll see what goes away when I disable base. See what goes away? It's kind of hard to differentiate what part of what was there before went away, but there's something that went away, okay? So I'm going to turn base back on, and then I'm going to disable land cover. Now, that's even, unless you're really sharp, you got a really sharp eye, you don't notice what's missing. But here's something that's a little bit more readily apparent, right? Let's turn off state borders. Remember, when we were looking at satellite view, there were no state borders, right? Let's turn back on satellite view. Right? When we were in satellite view, there were no state borders, okay? But you can actually turn state borders on in satellite view. Now, it's kind of difficult to see. I can see them clearly. I don't know if you all can see them, but there are state borders around each one of the states. You can sort of see them down here in the New Mexico region. You can see that dotted line right there. There are state borders right on top of the satellite. You can turn them on and off. So there are layers to maps inside of Tableau that you can enable and or disable based on your preference or your visualization goal, right? And by the way, if you have custom sales regions like Northwest, East, and South that you want to map inside of Tableau, it may be sort of confusing to then show state borders because you have a custom region, right? And you don't want to necessarily group data elements or the data marks by state. You want to group them by the region. So turning off the state boundaries is sometimes helpful. You can also disable the state names. So now all you see is dots with no names. You can disable the country name, right? So the United States doesn't appear there. And then there's other things here. I'll talk about these four options right here. I've got 6 minutes left. These are county borders and county names and zip code boundaries and zip code labels. Now, Dwight, help me with something. We've got postal code. It's got a, it's playing a geographic role. Why is zip code boundaries not enabled? It's not enabled for some maps and for some data sets. And I'll talk about the detail of that next time. I'm not going to dig into that today, okay? It requires a rather lengthy explanation, which I don't want to spend time on right now. But anyway, you can turn on cities, you can turn on water. And remember I said I'm horrible with geography. I don't know what body of water this is. If I turn on water labels, you can see which body of water it is. So this is the Gulf of Mexico. Let's see. Here's the North Pacific Ocean. That's Hudson Bay. I know this is Lake Michigan down here. and so on and so on and so on. You can turn on the waterways, right? Oh, and by the way, in Tableau, in order to drag a map, you click and hold down the left key until your mouse changes to a hand, and then you should be able to drag the map. I mean, until it changes to a cross, two arrows, a crosshair, and then you can drag the map and just move it to your heart's content, okay, and center it. Okay, so we can turn on water labels, we can turn on points of interest. There's, let's see, I've got 5 minutes left. The last thing I'll mention is you can actually create maps in Tableau that's not based on your data. You can include a layer in your map that's disparate or detached from your data. Let me give an example. Under data layer right here, we can actually include census population layer on our map. Now, please note, this is not the shape. There's our shapes, right? This is totally separate from the map that we created in Tableau, our shape map. This is population data by zip code for the United States. And we can change it from zip code to state, right? Our shape is still there. If you'll notice, on some of these, you can see it. Our dot is still there. This is a map layer that's independent of your data. That's why we call it layers. Okay. All right. And so layers is rather, which is why I'm requiring multiple sessions, because this is a rather complicated topic when it comes to mapping. And it sometimes can be a challenge to really get your hands around what's happening with layers. Suffice it to say, when we're in our data and I choose, let's choose postal code, and I'm going to drag it on top of my map, you'll notice what appears in the upper left-hand corner. Anybody see that square? It said add a marks layer. That's a new term, marks layer. It's not marks card. It's not layer. It's marks layer. This is where we're going to open up our next lunch and learn session, because this is what allows you to stack multiple things on top of a map and come up with some really interesting views. I'm going to drop postal code on top of there and you can see what happens. So now I have a layer for state and a layer for postal code. And my state, I can make this umbrellas or some other shape. I've got 2 minutes. Hurry up, Dwight. Let's make it squares. We'll make it really large so you can see the squares. There are the squares right there. And for postal code, we're going to turn it into shape and we'll make them stars. And we'll make it large so you can see the stars. Right? So here's a square and here's a star. Now, these squares and stars exist on two totally different layers, as indicated by the marks layer. This is what they mean when they say marks layer. It's called a layer because you can have totally different colors, totally different sizes, totally different shapes, a totally different map type on this layer than you do this layer. That's why they're called map layers. Okay, that's the last topic I'm going to cover for today. I know it's a bit of a data dump. It's a bit haphazard. I'll be a little bit more focused with functionality next week, but hopefully this introduces you to the basics of how to create a map in Tableau. Are there any questions? I need sound if I'm going to know that you're talking. Okay. I don't have any sound. That means there are no questions. Thank you so much for your time. I don't take this for granted. Really appreciate everybody that attended. As normal, once the recording is prepped and done, I will post it on the Tableau community of practice.